Over 100 years ago, scientists developed the first and only vaccine for tuberculosis. We have tests to diagnose it and drugs that can cure it. But even with all this, why is TB still the deadliest infectious disease? Over 10 million people fall ill with tuberculosis, or TB for short, every year. About 1 in every 25 cases will be a drug-resistant strain of the disease, making it especially difficult, if not impossible, to treat and cure. In 2022, 1.3 million people died from TB. Let's put this in context. TB is the #1 deadliest infectious disease. It kills more people than malaria and HIV combined. And although COVID-19 briefly took the top spot for a few years, TB has once again reclaimed its deadly title. Rewind several years, and TB deaths were actually declining. Progress was slow but steady. Fast forward to 2020, and you'll spot a sudden change. As the COVID-19 pandemic took hold, TB control programs around the world were disrupted, reversing years of hard-won progress. Deaths and cases started to rise again. However, the fight against TB was struggling long before COVID-19 hit. To really understand this issue, we need to go further back an entire century. 100 years ago, the Bacille Calmette-Guerin vaccine, commonly shortened to BCG, was invented. It played, and still plays, an important role in protecting children from the most deadly forms of TB. But for anyone older, the protection is limited. That's particularly important to note, because 9 in 10 cases worldwide are in adults and adolescents, not children.
Virtually every newborn baby all over the world, or at least in lower and middle income countries, are receiving this vaccine very, very soon after birth.
That's Professor Willem Hanekom, by the way.
Now, adolescents and adults are really the people that spread TB. They have a different kind of TB from childhood TB, where they've got lots of bugs around and they cough them out and spread the TB in the community.
It's clear the world would benefit from a new TB vaccine. Luckily, TB is curable. The problem is millions of people still go untreated, either because they don't have access to treatments or they don't know they're infected in the first place. In some of the worst affected countries, less than half will receive the drugs they need to get well again. And even when there is access to treatment, there's an issue with completion rates, risking further infections. Here's Professor Mwandumba to explain some more.
The minimum duration of treatment that one can have is 6 months. I mean, if you ask somebody to take TB drugs for 6 months every single day, it is quite a big ask. But the fact that you're asking the patients to come back to clinic time and time again during the course of treatment, not everybody has the means to get back to clinic to get medications.
In 2022, the number of people officially diagnosed with TB reached a record-breaking high of 7.5 million. That's roughly the entire population of Hong Kong or New York City. Although this is a worryingly high number, it does suggest our global diagnosis systems are recovering after COVID-19 related disruptions. Despite these likely diagnosis improvements, over 3 million people are missed every year. You might have noticed researchers calling these the missing millions. Multiple innovations over the decades have worked to improve diagnosis rates, tackle multi-drug resistant strains, and reduce treatment lengths. Though access to these new interventions is still limited in many of the most deeply affected areas. 80% of cases and deaths are in low to middle income countries, and right now, the highest numbers of new cases are in Southeast Asia and Africa. So, thanks to a deadly combination of patchy diagnosis, unequal access to treatment, and increasingly common drug-resistant strains, TB continues to kill millions year after year. We need new ideas, fast.
If you were to talk about multi-drug resistant TB, then there are specific regions of the world that are hotspots for that. South America, for example, Peru had a big problem. But what we learned from that experience is how we can engage communities in the management of drug-resistant TB and how we can manage patients with drug-resistant TB at home and not in the hospital setting.
Over the last few years, money put into TB services actually decreased. We have just half of what's needed. And whilst research investment has been increasing slowly, it's still well below the $5 billion goal set by the United Nations. The result? More of what's happening right now. Higher levels of TB, increasing drug resistance, inadequate solutions. It's also worth mentioning that around the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic, the world funneled at least $104 billion into developing COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics. That huge number is 162 times more than governments spent on TB research in 2020, despite both being the top 2 most deadly infectious diseases. Now, some positive updates. The COVID-19 pandemic actually reinforced a need for collaboration and a focus to end TB. Back in January 2023, the WHO announced plans to use lessons from the COVID-19 response to set up a new council for TB vaccines. At the 2023 UN General Assembly, world leaders approved new targets to help end the TB epidemic.
So many commitments have been done today. Ensure that TB is on top of the agenda and that one day we shall end TB.
And after 100 long years, there's finally been breakthroughs in new vaccine development. While this progress is reassuring, there's big challenges ahead. The pace of innovation just hasn't been fast enough. We still need to find ways to secure funding and close the gap, invest in more research, as well as keep pushing for affordable, accessible, equitable solutions. Only then will we move closer to a future without TB.